Today, we are going to look at major regulations and then risk assessment. Among the regulations, we have Puwer regulations, we have roller regulations. After that, we'll also go and look at risk assessment. So, legal context and how Puwer and roller came into force. Here we are going to look at a brief description of Roller and Puwer and how they happened to come into force. Now, Puwer 1998 places duties on those who own, operate, or control work equipment to ensure it is suitable, safe, maintained, inspected, and used by trained and informed people with the appropriate protective measures and controls. It sits under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 framework and applies across all sectors including lifting operations, where cranes, MUPs, forklifts and accessories are. So under Puwer, all equipments that fall under Puwer are described as worker equipment. Anything you use to do work is a worker equipment. So it came into force on 5th December 1998. That's why it is called Puwer 1998. Let us look at Roller. Roller 1998, for it focuses specifically on lifting equipment and lifting operations. Roller requires planning by competent persons and it needs adequate supervision, proper execution, and then thorough examination. Without leaving marking and strength, stability of lifting equipment. So the HSE's L113 ACO provides authoritative guidance and legal context for compliance across all industries, connecting roller duties with the safe lifting practice in the UK. Roller regulations focuses majorly on lifting operations and then lifting equipment. For example, forklifts, mobile cranes, majorly lifting equipment. Now, Puwer 1998 regulations is also applicable to lifting operations. Roller regulations are a subset of Puwer regulations, whereby Puwer covers all work equipment. Any tool or any equipment used to do work falls under Puwer. But Roller, for it is specific to only lifting equipment. We go back to Puwer. Now we are going to be breaking down some of the Puwer regulations. Puwer regulation 1 up to 3 is all about introduction. It will define work equipment and everything. But for our case, we are majorly interested from regulation 4 up to where we are going to end. So regulation 4 says suitability of work equipment. Every employer shall ensure that work equipment is so constructed or adapted to as to be suitable for the purpose of which it is used or provided. Now, you as a lifting supervisor or you a banksman or another person, you need to ensure that you use a suitable equipment for the job which is supposed to do. If you are going to lift a load, a heavy load, ensure that the rated capacity of the crane aligns with the load you are going to lift. Don't get like a 10-ton mobile crane and use it to lift a 30-ton load. That's not okay. You have to ensure that you have selected the suitable equipment for the job. In selecting work equipment, every employer shall have regard to the working conditions and to the risks to the health and safety of persons which exist in the premises or undertaking in which the work equipment is to be used and any additional risk posed by the use of that work equipment. This can be achieved through risk assessment. Another thing, every employer shall ensure that work equipment is used only for operations for which under conditions it is suitable. I've already talked about that. This regulation, suitable means suitable in any respect which it is reasonably foreseeable will affect the health and safety of any person. That is regulation 4. Suitability of work equipment. The equipment has to be suitable. We go to regulation 5. Is maintenance. Every employer shall ensure that work equipment is maintained in an efficient state, in efficient working order and in good repair. Every employer shall ensure that where any machinery has a maintenance logo, the logo is kept up to date. So, with maintenance, ensure that the work equipment you are going to use has been maintained and it is in a good working condition. Inspection. Regulation 6 is inspection. Every employer shall ensure that where the safety of work equipment depends on the installation conditions, it should be inspected after installation and before being put into service for the first time or after assembly at a new site or in a new location to ensure that it has been installed correctly and is safe to operate. Now, with inspection, every employer shall ensure that work equipment exposed to conditions causing deterioration, which is liable to result in dangerous situation, is inspected. Each time it should be inspected each time that exceptional circumstances which are liable to jeopardize the safety of work equipment have occurred. It should be inspected. Every employer shall ensure that the result of an inspection is made and the regulation is recorded and kept until next inspection. And this regulation is recorded now. When we come, look at inspection, you have to ensure that the equipment which your team or the equipment you are going to use on site has been inspected and it is in a good working condition or good working state. In case something happens or an incident, that equipment should be re-inspected. In the case that equipment maybe has been exposed to hazards, it should be re-inspected to ensure that it remains in a good working condition. Regulation 7 is all about specific risks. Where the use of work equipment is likely to involve a specific risk to health and safety, every employer shall ensure that the use of that work equipment is restricted to those persons given the task of using them. Repairs, modifications, maintenance, or service of that work equipment is restricted to those persons who have been specifically designated to perform operations of that description. Now we go back, like supposing you are operating a crane and you realize that there is something not right. You are not supposed to go under the engine and begin repairing it by yourself. No, you need to call in those authorized personnel to come and do the repairs. Unless if among your team, one of them has been authorized to do those repairs. Now, information and instructions. Regulation 8. Every employer shall ensure that all persons who use work equipment have available to them adequate health and safety information. Shall ensure that any of his employees who supervises or manages the use of work equipment has available to him adequate health and safety information. Now, with information and instruction, whether you're lifting supervisor or banksman, ensure that you have been given sufficient information to ensure that work is done when there's sufficient health and information. Every employer shall ensure that all persons who use work equipment have all the adequate and sufficient information appropriate to ensure that any work is being executed in a safe manner. This can include safe working procedures. So, safe working procedures, um, warnings, it can include warnings, yeah, so sufficient information. And then the information and instructions, the employer is supposed to train its employees to ensure that they are competent when doing the work. Um, Without prejudice to generality of paragraph 1 and 2, the information and instruction required by either of those shall include information and, where appropriate, written instructions. The conditions in which and the methods by which the work equipment may be used, foresee an abnormal situation and the action to be taken if such a situation were to occur, and any conclusions to be drawn from experience in using the work equipment. Information and instruction required by the regulation shall be readily comprehensible to those concerned. Yeah, Regulation 9 is about training. Every employer shall ensure that all persons who use work equipment have received adequate training for purposes of health and safety, including training in the methods which may be adopted when using the work equipment, any risks which such use may entail, and precautions to be taken. Every employer should ensure that any of his employees who supervise the use of work equipment has received adequate training for the purposes of health and safety. The employer is supposed to ensure that whether you are a supervisor, you have been trained and certified, you are competent. Whether the banksman has been trained and certified and is competent. Which is a competent person? A person who has been trained, certified, with sufficient knowledge and skills, and has sufficient experience. Regulation 10, conformity with the community requirements. Every employer shall ensure that an item of work equipment has been designed and constructed in compliance with any essential requirements, that is to say, requirements relating to its design or construction in any of the instruments listed in Schedule 1. Where an essential requirement applied to the design or construction of an item of work equipment, the requirements of regulations 11 to 19 and 22 to 29 shall apply in respect of that item, to the extent that the extension. This in order to cut everything short, ensure that the equipment you are using complies with international standards. Here, we are majorly using European standard BSEN standards, whereby BS 7121 is the lead when if you are dealing with the mobile cranes or cranes BS 7121. And if possible, check out whether the equipment are having a CE marking. I guess you know CE marks. Um, Marks, where can I find it? When you try to look on this box, I'm sorry, the light is not sufficient. You can see that CE mark, meaning that this equipment was constructed and conforms to the international standards. Regulation 11, dangerous parts of machinery. Every employer shall ensure that measures are taken in accordance with paragraph 2, which are effective to prevent access to any dangerous part of machinery or to any rotating stock or bar, or to stop the movement of any dangerous part of machinery or rotating stock or bar before any part of a person enters a danger zone. The measures required by paragraph 1 shall consist of the provision of fixed guards enclosing every dangerous part of a rotating stock or bar, where and to the extent that is practicable to do so. So, now dangerous parts of machinery. Every employer should ensure that measures have been taken up to prevent person or any access to the dangerous parts of a machinery or any kind of rotating equipment by installation. Now, when we go to the hierarchy of control, under engineering control, it says that installing a barrier between you and hazard. Here, by installation of guards to prevent access to the rotating parts of an equipment. Now, I've talked about guards. So all guards and protection devices, provided under the above paragraph A, B, and then paragraph 2 shall be suitable for the purpose for which they are provided. Like in some rotating equipment with the rotating parts, they are supposed to be made that when the operator opens the guards, it has to stop automatically. So the guard acts as a switch. It has to work only when the guard has already secured the person or the operator from the rotating parts. They should be of good construction, sound material, and of adequate strength. Should be maintained in an efficient state, in efficient working order, and in a good repair, and shall not give rise to any increased risk to health or safety. Should not be easily bypassed or disabled. Should be situated as sufficient distance from the danger zone. Should not unduly restrict the view of the operating cycle of the machinery. Now, all protection appliances under those paragraphs shall comply with that paragraph. There are so many paragraphs, but just know that all work equipment should have protection guards to prevent access into danger zones. Protection against specific hazards. This is regulation 12. Regulation 7 was about specific risks. This is specific hazards. Every employer shall take measures to ensure that the exposure of a person using work equipment to any risk to his health and safety is either prevented or, where that is not reasonably practicable, is adequately controlled. The measures required by the first paragraph shall A. be measures other than the provision of personal PPE. So before you even provide the PPE, put up the control measures to ensure that those people follow. PPE should only be the last line of defense. Should wear appropriate measures to minimize the effects of hazard as well as to reduce the likelihood of the hazard occurring. Hazards referred to in paragraph 1 are any article or substance falling or being ejected from the work equipment. Rupture or disintegration of parts of work equipment catching fire or overturning, the unintended or premature discharge of any article or of any gas, dust, liquid, vapor, or other substance, which in each case is produced, used, or stored in the worker equipment. So, for the purpose of this regulation, adequately means should adequately have regard only to the nature of the hazard and the nature and degree of exposure to the risk. This regulation will not apply where any of the following regulations apply in respect of any risk to person. This is too much, but under regulation 12, uh, ensure that your employer prevent you from um, to protect you against specific hazards. Regulation 13, high or very low temperature. Every employer shall ensure that work equipment, parts of work equipment, and the end article or substance produced, used or stored in work equipment, or is at high or very low temperature shall have protection where appropriate so as to prevent injury to any person by burn, scald, or sear. Now, supposing you are lifting a load containing liquefied is it called liquefied nitrogen gas? It is extremely cold. They have to be protected so that they are not exposed to such dangerous, uh, very low temperature chemicals or like liquefied, is it liquid nitrogen gas? It is extremely cold. When it comes into your body, you may be affected. Now, suppose you are working in highly extreme temperatures, you, proper procedure should be in place to secure you, because the more your body is exposed to extreme temperatures, dehydration happens, and when dehydration happens, uh, you may experience severe problem that can even result into fatality. So the only thing you can do, taking short breaks or you plan such that your exposure to extreme temperatures is low. Regulation 14 is controls for starting or making a significant change in operating condition. Every employer shall ensure that where appropriate, work equipment is provided with one or more controls for the purposes of starting the work equipment, including restarting after stoppage for any reason. Controlling any change in speed, pressure, or other operating condition of the work equipment where such condition after the change result in risk to health and safety which is greater than, yeah. So you have to ensure that like any work equipment is provided by one or more starting controls. Supposing you are powering an equipment, you shouldn't just power on the equipment, it begins running at once at a very high speed. Supposing there is an error or you are lifting, you are using a mobile crane hoisting up after connecting your load. Now you want to see how the load behaves. By you just tilting the controls, the load begin hoisting up at a very high speed, meaning that the moment it starts going at a very high speed, it can tend to swing and maybe it hits the people around, it may collide with other loads or objects around, hence causing a serious accident. So they are supposed to be made in a way that at least more controls are put in place to enable the change of speed or the change in operating functions. For cranes, you'll find what they call rabbit speed, uh, turtle speed, yeah, there are some different modes depending on the crane. Yeah, so you put in a mode to enable you to operate safely. You put in turtle speed, you operate slowly. Or you put in the rapid speed, mean that operation is going to be faster. Some equipment are made in a way that after you operate in the joystick, the crane will begin, let me say if you are moving out slowly, whereby for you to increase the energy, you have to put your foot on the accelerator to increase the energy. Other equipments, you may find that it will not even boom out at all until when you press on the accelerator. So such controls are supposed to be made in that way for the safety. Supposing you have put in, it enables you to assess the load being lifted such that it doesn't cause any accident. Regulation 15 is all about stop controls. Every employer shall ensure that where appropriate, work equipment is provided with one or more readily accessible controls that control the operation of which will bring the work equipment to a safe condition in a safe manner. For example, you'll find like work stop control should be more um, prioritized than start controls. Because for stop controls, the moment you want to stop, it has to work there and then. If it fails, it may result into an accident. So for stop controls, it has to be made in a way that whenever you want to stop, it stop, and they are supposed to be located um, in areas that can easily be accessed. In case, for example, emergency controls, you want to stop, there is an incident coming up, you just press the emergency has to cut off all operations. Emergency stop controls. Every employer shall ensure that where appropriate, work equipment is provided with one or more readily accessible emergency stop controls, unless it is not necessary by reason of nature of the hazards, the time taken for the work equipment to come to a complete stop. The same thing I've already explained. Controls. Every employer shall ensure that all controls for work are clearly visible and identifiable, including by appropriate marking where necessary. Now, for the cranes, you have to ensure that each control has been clearly marked and can easily be understood. It can be marked by words, and in addition to that, by symbols. You may find that symbols, even if you fail to read the words, you cannot fail to understand the symbol. So they should be clearly marked, given appropriate marking. Every employer shall ensure, where appropriate, that so far as it is practicable, the operator of any control is able to ensure from the position of that control that no person is in a place where he will be exposed to any risk to his health and safety as a result of the operation of that control, but where or to the extent that it is not reasonably practicable. Here we will be brief. Ensure that they have been marked with appropriate uh, functions. Regulation 18, control system. Every employer shall ensure, so far as practical, that all control systems of equipment are safe and are chosen, making due allowance for the failures, faults, or consequences to be expected in the planned circumstances of use. Without prejudice, like control system, let me talk about the emergency. In case any equipment you are operating, then it detects any danger, it is supposed to be made in a way that it can cut off operations to prevent the catastrophe. Like if it tries to detect any sort of overloading, it has to cut off all the operations. Regulation 19, isolation from sources of energy. Every employer shall ensure that, where appropriate, work equipment is provided with suitable means to isolate it from all its sources of energy. Without prejudice to the generality of paragraph, every employer shall take appropriate measures to ensure that reconnection of any energy source to work equipment does not expose any person using the work equipment to any risk to his that may pose as a big risk to his health and safety. Now, when you are working, you are isolating an equipment from any power source. Ensure that it has been isolated completely. There are some areas or work sites where you find that they have a standby generator. Some here you are going to maintain the work equipment when you work shop and you want to enter inside. Ensure that everything has been isolated totally and you have to communicate default tagout lockout procedure. The default tagout lockout procedures to ensure that the power has been totally isolated, such that you work, you do the maintenance properly, and come out when you are safe. Regulation 20 is stability. Every employer shall ensure that work equipment or any part of work is stabilized by clamping or otherwise where necessary for the purposes of health or safety. Lighting. Now you may find yourself at starting point as lifting at night. Ensure that there is sufficient lighting whenever you are working. And even if during the ensure that there is sufficient lighting, you should be able to see all the operation, the road, the equipment, the people involved. You should be able to see everything clearly. 22 maintenance operations. Every employer shall take appropriate measures to ensure that work equipment is so constructed and adapted that so far as reasonably practicable, maintenance operation which involve a risk to health or safety can be carried out when the work equipment is shut down or in other cases. Maintenance operation can be carried out without exposing the person carrying them out to a risk to his health or safety. Appropriate measures can be taken for the protection of any person carrying out maintenance operations which involve a risk to his health and safety. Regulation 23 is all about marking. Every employer shall ensure that work equipment is marked in a clearly visible manner with any marking appropriate for reasons of health and safety. Warnings. Every employer shall ensure that work equipment incorporates any warnings or warning devices which are appropriate for reasons of health and safety. So I talked about warnings. For this case, pure regulation will end on regulation 24, will not go beyond. Because, yeah, part 3 is all about mobile work equipment. Maybe let me just go over them. Regulation 25, employees carried on mobile work equipment. Every employer shall ensure that no employee is carried by mobile work equipment unless it is suitable for carrying persons, and it incorporates features for reducing to as low as reasonably practicable. Ensure that any equipment you use, you ride, it has been designated and described that they are suitable for money trading purposes. Rolling over of mobile work equipment. Every employer shall ensure that where there is a risk to an employee riding on mobile work equipment from its rolling over, it is minimized by stabilizing the work equipment, a structure which ensures the work equipment does not that the equipment does not fall on its side, a structure giving sufficient clearance to anyone being carried if it overturned further than that. So, in case there is a rollover for mobile work equipment, there must be a provision that there is some clearance, sufficient clearance to enable someone to try to make someone safer in case of any overturn. 27. Overturning of forklift trucks. Every employer shall ensure that the forklift truck to which Regulation 26 refers and which car is adapted or equipped to reduce to as low as reasonably practicable the risk to safety from its overturning. This can be achieved through the design. So, for pure regulations, you can end there. Let us go back to ROLA 1998 regulations. ROLA 1998 regulation for lifting operations. ROLA narrows the lanes. In the beginning, I told you, ROLA 1998 is a subset of Puwer 1998. Lifting equipment and lifting operations. Below are the core regulations that a lifting supervisor must enforce in planning, execution, and assurance. Roller duty overview for lifting operations. On the third year, there are roller regulations, and here, duty focus, lifting specific application, than one example. Regulation 4. You find that most roller regulations are almost the same as pure regulations. So, strength and stability. Equipment must be strong, stable for loads and conditions. Example, detect crane capacity due to wind, and then verify outrigger reactions. Lifting equipment for lifting persons, Regulation 5. Only equipment designed certified for lifting personnel. Only use equipment certified for lifting personnel. Regulation 6. Positioning and installation. Requires lifting equipment to be positioned and installed safely, meaning it must stand on stable ground with adequate bearing capacity. Be clear of hazards like power lines, have exclusion zones to protect the people. This is an example. A tower crane is installed in a reinforced concrete foundation designed to that standard. Positioned clear of overhead power lines and surrounded by barriers to create an exclusion zone. This ensures compliance with Law Regulation 6 on safe positioning and installation. Regulation 7 is all about marking. Safe working load limit should be clearly marked on equipment and accessories. And some other major markings will be color code, correct color code, and then identification number. Shackles should be stamped, slings tagged with working load limit, and then angle limitations. Regulation 8 is all about organization of lifting operations. All lifting operations should be properly planned, supervised, and then carried out in a safe manner. Appointed person develop lifting plan, banksman controls signals. The lifting supervisor, you can also come up with the lifting plan for each lifting operations. All lifting plans are contained under Regulation 8 of LORA. Now, during organization of lifting operation, the first thing you need to consider is the weight of the load, the center of gravity, the type of communication you are going to use, and so many others. Regulation 9 is all about thorough examination and inspection. The duty here, lifting equipment must undergo thorough examination and where appropriate, inspection by a competent person. Key points should be inspected before first use if safety depends on installation. 2. At regular intervals. For example, 6 months for lifting equipment, stock accessories used for lifting people, then 12 months for other lifting equipment as specified by the competent person. Under here, roller regulation, and we can also follow the roller matrix. I can share it if you want it. You will just inform me. Example, mobile crane is relocated to a new site. Before lifting begins, a competent person carries out a thorough examination to confirm stability and safety. In your lifting plan, you may find that you will need to calculate the ground bearing pressure. What is ground bearing pressure? You will see it as we go on. Regulation 10 of Puwer, reports and defects. After any thorough examination, ensure that you highlight the defects you have identified. Don't just take it as a routine. Highlight them. Competent person must provide a written report after each thorough examination or inspection. Key points. Reports must detail the condition of equipment and any defects. If a defect poses an imminent risk of serious injury, the equipment must be taken out of service immediately. The competent person must notify the employer and, if necessary, the enforcing authority. That's Regulation 10, reports and defects. Regulation 11 of LORA, keeping of information. Employers must keep reports of thorough examination and inspection. Reports must be retained for at least 2 years or until the next report is made, whichever is longer. Reports must be available to enforcing authorities upon request. A lifting supervisor. Now, when you want to say it as a lifting supervisor, the first thing you need to do, so many other people leave out this. First, get the report of thorough examination for any lifting equipment or any accessory before you begin any lifting operation. Yeah. The last part is risk assessment. We will begin with the definition. Risk assessment is a structured process to identify hazards, evaluate likelihood and severity, and implement controls to reduce risks to an acceptable level before lifting work begins. In lifting, it covers planning, selection, rigging, set conditions, personnel, and emergency measures, and is a legal cornerstone of safe operations in Europe and UK. Applicable definitions. A hazard. A source is a source of potential harm, e.g., wind, unstable ground, sling damage, pinching points. Risk. The combination of likelihood and severity of harm, e.g., crane overturn due to inadequate ground bearing capacity. Another one, control measures, engineering, administrative and PPE actions to reduce risk. This now, control measures like you apply the engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. Competent person, someone with training, experience, and knowledge to plan, supervise, assess lifts aligned with LORA Regulation 8. As I told you about Regulation 8, is all about lifting, planning, and everything. Residual risk remaining after controls must be communicated and accepted through the lifting plan and toolbox store. Now, steps of a risk assessment with examples. Now, when carrying out a risk assessment, you define the task and the scope. Describe the load, the weight, the center of gravity, the lifting path, where do you want to pick the load and where do you want to land it. The crane configuration, which kind of crane configuration do you need? Are you planning to use tandem, like using two cranes? Example, 12-ton transformer, it has an offset center of gravity, so I will use a tandem lift path over piping corridor. It is summarized but containing most of the things. Now, after defining the task, identify the hazards. Hazards may be environment. In the environment, can be in the ground conditions, equipment limits, rigging angles, proximity to power line structures, or communication failures. For example, wind gusts exceeding crane shaft limits, sling angle less than 60 degrees, increasing line tension. Now, 3. Assess the risks. Estimate likelihood severity using the risk matrix. Risk matrix is all about like how severe. Now, how likely would that accident happen? And suppose it has happened, how severe is it going to be? Find it multiplying by likelihood will go up, severe will go horizontal. The other will be vertical, this one horizontal. So there will be numbers. Under severity, it will be 1, 2, 3, up to 4 going up. Then severity, the other one is likelihood. Severity will be also 1 up to 4. Now, one by one will multiply by 1 like that, risk matrix. Now, select the controls. Engineering controls. Correct crane, mass size to ground bearing pressure, rated sling or shackles by their standards, and 2 block presence of tag lines. Administrative. there's a lifting plan, there's an appointed person, there's a banksman, signaling protocol, weather criteria, no-go zones, or sequencing. Now, PPE elements, there are elements in place, gloves, cut resistant for rigging, high visibility vests. Like when you are supervising a lifting operation or you are working as a banksman or rigger, ensure that the person giving signals puts on a high visibility vest or dresses in a way that can easily be identified by the crane operator or by another person involved in the lifting operation. Now, plan and brief. Document controls in a lifting plan. Conduct toolbox talk. Confirm roles and communications. Example, banksman assigned, hand signals, radio checks should be agreed. You need to communicate with the banksman assigned, communicate with the current operator, they agree on the signals to use. You may find these signals are a bit different, so they need to first agree. Execute and monitor. Dynamic assessment, pause for changing conditions. For example, there is wind or you are working on a highway. In the case there is change in the traffic, enforce exclusion zones. For example, stop lift when the rain reduces visibility. Rebrief before resuming. Because also you can view your risk assessment. Now review and record. Record outcomes, near misses, lessons learned from continuous improvement. Threshold after an unplanned gust event. Yeah, so that is all about risk assessment. So ensure that you can go through, I can send you these PDFs, you go through them. Now, toolbox talk for lifting operation. What is a toolbox talk? Is a short focused safety briefing conducted before a lift to ensure the team understands hazards, controls, roles, and communication. It reinforces the lifting plan and risk assessment and enables dynamic risk and control as conditions change. What to cover? The load, route, crane configuration, the rigging plan. Now we are discussing before beginning any lifting operation. You begin with the toolbox tour. You are discussing the configuration you are going to use, the rigging plan. You describe the hazards present, wind threshold, ground conditions, pinch points, overheads, public interference. Discuss the controls. Which controls are you putting into place? Exclusion zones, banksman signals, tag lines, safe working load markings, weather stop criteria, roles and comms. Who signals? Now, roles and communications. You need to identify who will give the signals. If it is a radio, which radio channels are you going to use? In the case of an emergency, which emergency phrase are you going to use? Certificate and checks. You need to check all the reports of thorough examination and even the certificates of competence for every member who will be involved. Stop work authority. Anyone can call a stop if risk changes. In case there has been a change in risk, you can call for a stop. An example. Brief. We are lifting a 12-ton transformer using a 200-ton mobile crane. At 18-meter radius, wind limit 10 meters per second, exclusion zone is barricaded. Only riggers and the banksman should be inside. Hazard controls. Watch pinch points at the hook, tag lines on corners. If wind gusts, we hold. No one should move under the load. Those are hazards and control signals. Hand signals are our primary. Radio channel 3 as a backup. In the case the operator cannot see the banksman, then we can switch to radio channel 3 as a backup. Banksman has sole authority to signal. Checks, confirms ring working load limit, angle at 60 degrees, shackles stamped, hook latch are functional, third examination within 12 months, accessory 60 months. Stopper, if anything looks off, call a stop. In case you have found that some certificates are defect, you need to stop the lifting operation, don't continue. Job safety analysis. A JSA breaks the job into steps. It identifies hazards for each step, assesses risks, and assigns control measures. For lifting, it integrates with the lifting plan and risk assessment to produce step-by-step safe systems of work. Structure and example. Job steps can be, position the crane, rig load test lift, cut out a test lift like after connection. Should you hoist or travel to a given location, land the load, then remove the rigging. Those are the steps. Hazards, ground settlement, misrigging, swinging load, proximity to structures, communication lapses. So those are like hazards. Controls, ground bearing mats. Ensure that you provide ground bearing mats. Rigging check by competent person, tag lines, exclusion zones, defined signals, and then weather limits. Sample entries. Rigging the load, hazard, incorrect sling angle increases tension. Leg sling, maintain greater or equal to 60 degrees angle. Confirm working load limit per tag and be within that standard. Hoisting, hazard, two block. Control, functional. Ensure that the anti-two block is functional. Banksman stop signal knows the stop signal. Slow hoist for the test lift. In case after connecting, you can hoist up slowly to cut out a test lift. Screwing near pipe rack. Hazard, there is a hazard like collision. So riggers can use tag lines to control the load flow to prevent it from hitting the nearby obstacles. Now we have another thing called permit to work system for lifting operations. A lifting permit to work authorizes the lift after verifying planning, the competence, equipment condition, environment, and controls. It creates a formal checkpoint before execution and integrates with the lifting plan and JSA. Core elements and example. Details, crane make or model, capacity lifting machinery, certificate, load description, weight type of lift. The preconditions, further examination reports. Now, verifying ground bearing pressure calculations, the weather limits, exclusion zones, communication plan, emergency arrangements, depending on where you're working from, depending on the company working procedures, the company requirements. Trade supervisor applies, appointed person reviews, site manager authorizes, and then he signs on by work, no permit to work on your work permit. Like after you ensuring that everything is in place, the site manager has to sign to approve, and before approving, it has to be reviewed. Example of permit to work flow. Application 200-ton crane, 12-ton lifting a 12-ton transformer, tandem lift flagged as heavy lift, attach third examination certificates, the rigging plan, wire rope selection by in a case, depending on what you are dealing with. Verification, auto-rigger reaction, calculation. The mat says wind is less hold. Now you may find that wind, depending on the equipment, may try to change. Like others will find 20 meters per second. So depending. Approve and briefing. Signature should be captured, toolbox talk should be conducted, radios checked, stop authority confirmed. More details about permit to work system. Permit to work system lifting operation. This is a formal written authorization system used to control high-risk activities. It is like a document, like a normal document used to control high-risk activities. It ensures that hazards are identified, risks are controlled, and work is carried out safely under supervision. The lifting operations permit to work system integrate with risk assessment, job safety analysis, and toolbox talks to provide a documented checkpoint before work begins. Permit to work system. I was so hot work permit required for tasks that generate heat, sparks or flames. For example, welding, cutting, grinding that could ignite flammable materials. Contents: description of work, type of hot work, location, the duration you are going to finish when doing that work. Fire hazards identified and control measures like fire blankets, extinguishers, isolation of combustibles. Now, PPE requirements. It also lists down the PPE requirements like face shields, gloves, flame-resistant clothing, and then authorization signatures plus other things depending on where you are working from. Example in lifting: welding lifting lugs onto a load before rigging. A hot work permit ensures fire extinguishers are on hand, combustibles are cleared, and the fire watch is present. Cold work permit required for non-hot work activity that still pose risks. For example, mechanical maintenance, confined space entry, chemical handling. In other cases, you'll find that there is a specific permit for confined space. So depending. Contents: it describes the work, like a task equipment and the location where you are going to work from, the hazards that apply to that workplace, the isolation procedures, lockout, tag out of hydraulic or electrical systems, the PPE requirements, for example, helmets, gloves, respiratory protection if needed, emergency arrangements, and then authorization signatures. Example in lifting: servicing a mobile crane's hydraulic system. A cold work permit ensures hydraulic pressure is isolated. Lockout or tag out applied and only authorized personnel enter the exclusion zone. Definition: permit to lift. Required for lifting operations involving cranes, MUPs, forklifts, or hoists. It ensures the lifting plan, equipment condition, and supervision are verified before execution. Contents: now, like for a permit, like a lifting permit, contents: it describe equipment details, crane type, capacity, um, yeah, LMI certificate reference, load description, the weight, the dimensions, center of gravity. This is like load moment certificate. Rigging plan like slings, shackles, spreader beams per the standard. Ground condition and stability checks like outrigger mass size per calculations. Weather limits like a wind speed threshold by that. This one is like um, original manufacturer's manual. This is all about original manufacturer's manual. Exclusion zones and communication plan like banksman, radios, or hand signals. Competent person now will authorize. Emergency procedures like stop work authority, rescue plan if lifting people. Example in lift: a tandem lift of a 12-ton transformer using two mobile cranes. The lifting permit confirms lifting this is all about
This is all about manufacturers, lifting equipment manufacturers. Certificates are valid, rigging gear inspected, wind speed monitored, exclusion zone enforced, thorough examination here they are not included, are valid. Why permit to work system matter for supervisors? They formalize risk control. No lift, weld or maintenance starts without documented authorization. Permit to work system is all about authorization. They integrate standards like Puwer 1998, Lola 1998 and other international BSEN